Precision Analytical would like to introduce you to our dried urine test for comprehensive hormones that we call Dutch. Dutch testing is a unique way to get a comprehensive look at your sex hormones and your adrenal hormones with a really easy patient collection. So we're not just looking at your basic hormones like testosterone and estradiol, but we're also looking at an expansive panel of androgens, an expansive panel of estrogen metabolites, and then for the adrenals, it's really unique in that you can see the daily free cortisol pattern that typically goes up in the morning and down throughout the rest of the day, and that's information that's really important to have, but typically only available in a saliva test. We're going to combine that then with cortisol metabolites, and it becomes a really comprehensive way to look at your hormones. But again, it's a really easy patient collection because all the patient has to do is saturate the filter paper of these collection devices 4 times throughout the day. So dinner time, bedtime, right when they wake up, and then 2 hours after waking, and then there's an extra one, a 5th one, if they wake up and urinate in the middle of the night. But it's a really easy collection compared to what you typically do to get a comprehensive hormone profile. The label here is a sticker, so they just fill it out, slap that on the handle of the collection device, and hang it up to dry for 24 hours, after which they can just mail them back into the lab in a standard envelope. So it's really easy in terms of collection and in terms of transport, but when you juxtapose the information you get from this test for sex and adrenal hormones with saliva testing, with serum testing, or a 24-hour urine test, it's not only easier, but it's actually more comprehensive and uniquely comprehensive compared to traditional tests. So if you'll watch through our video series, we've got a 10-part video series that just walks through this testing matrix of looking at all these different scenarios of wanting to test sex hormones, adrenal hormones, or all these different permutations for hormone replacement therapy. It's a really complex topic, and we want to go through each one of those and look at the pros and cons of serum, of saliva, of a traditional urine test, and then our dried urine testing. And we're going to show you some of the advantages that this test has. Now, I'm going to go through just a couple quick case studies to show you kind of the benefit of having such a uniquely comprehensive test. Here's a female, her results, and she's got issues related to high androgens. She's got facial hair that's growing that she doesn't want. She's got thinning scalp hair, as well as some other issues. So when we look at her hormones in blood, in saliva, or in urine, you're going to get your basic male-related hormones, testosterone, DHEA, those are called androgens. Right? You can get those out of any of the tests, but for her, they happen to be normal. We look a little bit further because in urine testing, you can actually measure with these androgen metabolites. So DHEA gets metabolized, and down here you can see these 2 compounds. These are the 2 most abundant androgen metabolites. You can only measure them in urine, and you can see that for this particular patient, they're actually quite high. One of them is right on the edge of normal, whereas the other one is way outside the normal range. So is she making a lot of androgens or not? If you're only looking at the basic hormones, you might miss it in this picture. If you look at testosterone, it's normal, but if you look downstream at the 2 testosterone metabolites, you can see there's actually a lot of hormone going through these pathways, but again, you're missing part of the picture if you're only looking at the basic hormones. Now, you might have to look at the specific video on androgen metabolism to get the details on this if you're not familiar with it, but the other thing that we can see from this profile is for both of these pairings, the hormones go down a 5-alpha pathway, that's the blue arrows, or a 5-beta pathway in red. Now, in short, if they go down the alpha pathway, they become more androgenic. For example, testosterone goes down this alpha pathway and makes 5-alpha DHT. That's actually 3 times as potent as testosterone, which can lead to facial hair growth, thinning scalp hair in women. And what you can see for this particular patient, if you can see this little red gauge here, it's pointing more towards the alpha because you can see in both these cases, the alpha metabolite is more elevated to a higher degree than is the beta metabolite. So that's the androgenic metabolite. So does this patient have high testosterone? No, her testosterone itself is not elevated, but all of the androgens she does have, which there is quite a bit when you look at these other metabolites, but they're all going in a direction that's making it more androgenic, and that's creating some of the symptoms. And you can go in and look at some of the different reasons why that may be, but the first thing we need to do is establish what is actually going on with this patient, and a more comprehensive test makes a lot of sense. If you look at the estrogens, it's the same sort of thing. She's taking a little bit of estradiol, and a whole lot of estriol. So when we look at her profile, I believe this patient was taking it orally. She's got a lot of estrone, because when you take oral estradiol, you get a lot of estrone sulfate, so the estrone is high. She's taking a really high dose of estriol, so that's high as well. And then estradiol is right down the middle. Now, if you were looking at, let's say, a serum test, you might only look at estradiol. Even in saliva, you might only look at estradiol, but we can look at all three. Now, that's good, but we're going to go even further than that, and not just look at how much estrogen she has, but what is her body doing with it? And what you can see is you have 3 different pathways they can go down. Now, again, you might want to go to the video on estrogen metabolism if you want a more detailed look at this, but in short, the 2-hydroxy or 2-OHE1 metabolite is considered favorable. You'd want to see that predominate. The 4-hydroxy-E1 can actually damage your DNA. It's been shown to be higher in people who go on to develop breast cancer. There's some links there between some of these other metabolites, potentially, and breast cancer, and that's a complex topic, but you'd really rather see estrogen coming down this 2-hydroxy pathway, and there are nutritional things you can do to improve that. But the first step is you need to know it. And so you can see that this patient actually has very poor metabolism. That's phase 1 metabolism. We can also look at phase 2 metabolism, which is methylation. That's where we're turning a 2-OH estrogen into a 2-methoxy. That's a protective step. And you can see for this particular patient, if you look at the index there, her methylation is quite low. She probably has some sort of genetic defect in her methylation, and she's not methylating well. And that is not good news if you have poor estrogen metabolism on this phase 1, where you've got this 4-hydroxyestrogen that's higher. That needs to be methylated, and you can see her methylation's not very good. So again, more information to be had when we look not just at the parent hormones, but at the metabolites as well. And that's where urine testing really is beneficial. But typically you're doing a 24-hour urine, and this is the information you lose. Why we would prefer saliva typically is because of the cortisol pattern. So if you look at a healthy control, the salivary free cortisol goes up and then back down. If you look at the healthy controls in urine, if you collect at the right time, it's actually the same pattern. And then you look at these patients with chronic fatigue syndrome, and guess what? Same pattern, but lower levels of cortisol. And again, the same story in urine. So as we're collecting these urine samples at specific times, we can get the same information that you would typically get in saliva, and that's really the missing piece of information in urine testing. Now, why do we use dried urine testing? It's simply convenience. And you can see it's very accurate compared to a liquid urine sample, so it makes a nice substitute, and then you have an easy collection and easy patient shipment, and they're a lot more stable once they're dry. Now, the reason that we do this for the adrenals, this is really the most profoundly unique piece to the test, is this. When we look at this patient, free cortisol pattern is low in the overnight sample, low in the morning. So here you can see the reference range is between the black lines. So her line is almost directly over the low part of the reference range. So she's low pretty much all day. So this number up here, this 10.0, is a 24-hour urine-free cortisol approximation from these values. And you can see she's low. So if you were looked in saliva, you'd likely see this same pattern of low cortisol during the day. So what you would typically think is that she doesn't make much cortisol. But what we find is a lot of the patients that have low levels of free cortisol actually show elevated levels of metabolized cortisol. Now, if this patient showed with low levels of metabolized cortisol, your assumption that she's not making much cortisol would be correct. But if you look at these numbers, 4,511, those are the same units as the free cortisol is measured in, and she never even hit 30 in the free cortisol. So most of the cortisol is here. So this is the best marker for overall cortisol production. So is this patient's cortisol production high or low? Well, it's actually high. Now, what caused it? In this particular case, we've got upregulated cortisol clearance. Now, what causes upregulated cortisol clearance? Long-term stress, obesity, hyperthyroidism. Hyperthyroidism is uncommon, but in this case, it was actually the culprit. She was She had low thyroid, hypothyroid, but she was accidentally taking her thyroid medication twice a day instead of once a day, so she had induced hyperthyroidism, which upregulated or increased her cortisol clearance, and now you have this situation where you don't have very much free cortisol, even though you're making tons of cortisol overall. And it's a very different clinical picture than the patient who is truly low in terms of cortisol production, and those patients again would be low for both free cortisol and metabolized cortisol. So this gives you more information to better characterize what's going on with a patient to make better medical decisions. So if you'll work your way through our 10-part series, you'll get a really nice overview and education on all of these different topics, and particularly the HRT monitoring. There's a lot of unique information that you'll see here that'll really help you navigate these questions of when can I use serum testing, when can I use saliva testing, 24-hour urine testing, and when is the dried urine test for comprehensive hormones uniquely valuable. And you'll find that we've built it very specifically to work very well in a lot of situations. So I think you'll find that it's a good option for hormone testing, easy for your patients. If you have questions on the test or are interested in it, feel free to email us at info@precisionhormones.com, and we have a lot of other information available on our website at precisionhormones.com, and we look forward to working with you.